we're making a quilted table runner using simple strip piecing and a simplified binding technique. Come along. So here we are at the sewing table, and I've already started working on the table runner. It is going to be a mini size, just about 9.5 inches wide and about 2 feet long. So because I have 3 fabrics, I'm doing strips of 2.5 inches wide by, I'm starting with 9.5 inches long. So I'll insert a clip here where I cut the strips, and all I did was cut off the edge, the selvage edge of the fabric, and square it up. So I just needed less than 1/3 of a yard of each fabric here. I'm only going to use 4 strips of each print, and I just, measured each one out, and here are all my strips. I am working with 100% cotton thread on my sewing machine, and I have my 1/4 inch foot installed. And so you can see here, these are faced together and sewn with a 1/4 inch seam. So I just did those first 2 faced together, sewed that 1/4 inch seam. I did not backstitch because it will be bound all around the edge. Then once those first 2 pieces are stitched together, we just open it up, place that 3rd piece face to face with the 2nd one, and stitch again. So I'll just show you repeating this once more, and then we'll go from there. So this is the right side facing up, and of course the next piece is going to face down, the right side facing down, and I'm making sure the top edge is lined up nicely. All my pieces weren't cut super even, so I'm just making sure to line up one edge so that everything is nice and straight. And I will end up cutting some excess off, so it's not a big deal. And then I'm just clipping along that edge, making sure to line everything up nice and even. And you could use sewing pins if that's what you have. Now my stitch length is just a normal stitch of 2.4 millimeters. Your machine might be a 2.5. And again, this is my 1/4 inch sewing foot. And all that means is that there's a little guide that lines up with the edge of the fabric, and it'll create a nice, perfect 1/4 inch seam as long as you got it along that edge. So here is that first seam. You can see it's a nice 1/4 inch, and we'll end up pressing the seams later, but for now I'm just going to flip it back open, make sure everything is lining up nicely at the top, and I'll repeat the same step with the cream fabric again. Again, facing the right sides together and lining up that top edge and clipping in place. And while I do that, I want to know, let me know in the comments if you are new to sewing. I've been sewing for just about a year, a little over a year now, and I've been following a lot of YouTube tutorials, so I definitely want to pay that forward, showing you all these sewing projects for beginners, or that are beginner friendly. But if you are not new to sewing, let me know what your favorite sewing project is. What do you like to sew, like crafty things, or do you do garment sewing? Let me know in the comments. So once again, I'll repeat that step of lining up with the edge of the 1/4 inch foot and sew just a straight stitch all the way down. And this can be very repetitive, so I'm just going to show you one more time and I'll speed up the sewing. But you could do this with any size width of strips that you want. You could do this with just one whole piece and skip the piecing part. And if you want to do that, just skip ahead to the part when I'm connecting these pieces and quilting, or when I'm done connecting these pieces to see how to quilt it, if that's what you need to know. But just know that my channel is heavily focused on beginners, so if you are brand new to sewing, let me know what you do want to learn, and I will try to do tutorials for those projects. All right, I've got 2 sets done and this is halfway there. So I'm going to do this twice more off camera and I will come back to show you how I'm going to do the quilting. Now here is the entire top completed and I am going to make a quilt sandwich. But first I did press the seams. I opened my seams and pressed them. You could just fold them one way or the other if you like, but I opened them so that the colors will kind of blend in with each other once the batting is in place. And so you'll see here that the batting makes it nice and camouflaged once it's behind that fabric. So I've got my backing fabric cut out, and that's going to be the length of the table runner when it's done. I did cut it slightly bigger, as well as the batting slightly bigger, because when you're quilting it can kind of shrink your project down a little bit. So that's why the backing and the batting are slightly bigger. And then once it is quilted, I will have to trim it all down to the right size. So let's go ahead and make a quilt sandwich, which just means layering your fabric with the batting in between, making sure I don't have any stray threads or anything on there. And I have my bottom with the right side facing down on my surface. Then I'll place the batting in between, and then my quilt top with the right side facing up. And then I'll also just, smooth everything out, making sure it's nice and straight, especially since that backing fabric is striped. I definitely don't want it to be skewed in any way. And then because I did cut it bigger and the front is smaller, I'm just trying to make sure that everything is lining up well, and I'm not going to have excess on one end or the other. Now what I'm going to do is use some quilting pins, and I believe I got these from Joann before they closed, and I probably won't need that many, but before I pin it all together, I am going to figure out where I want my quilting lines to go. So what I am going to do, because the strips are 2 inches wide, I'm going to do my quilting spaced 2 inches apart, and I want to do a diagonal line going each way, so it'll create like a diamond shape, which is what I saw in an inspiration picture that I saw on Pinterest. So at first I was going to use some chalk to mark my quilting lines, but thankfully I decided to test it out, and this is a tip if you are new to sewing. If you are going to make lines on anything, always test out whether you're using a chalk piece of chalk or any of those marking pens. Be sure to test it on a piece of scrap fabric and then use whatever method it calls for to remove it, and just make sure that the color does not leave any kind of residue on your fabric. So what I did here is I tested this blue chalk on that cream fabric, and after a while it was still showing up. So just a tip, test your chalk or marking pen on your fabric before you commit. I also tested that white marking pencil on the blue fabric, and it was still showing up after it dried a little bit. So what I did end up using is a bone folder that I have on hand. It's actually a paper crafting tool, but it does make nice creases in fabric. And so what I did is just line up my 45-degree line on my ruler with my fabric up at the top there, and made sure to kind of start in the center and then use that bone folder to make a crease. And you may not be able to see it on camera, but it does make a nice visible crease, visible enough that I can see and follow it on my sewing machine. So I'll just make these lines every 2 inches, and then we'll do some quilting. So I started with these large quilting pins, but you can see here that I kind of struggled getting them through all 3 layers with the batting. I'm not sure if it's just how thick they are, but it was a little bit of a struggle. So I just switched to some regular safety pins I had on hand and pinned those all the way across. And you can see I'm going in between those lines that I scored in the fabric, just so that when I go to sew on the line, the pins aren't getting in the way. So I did install my walking foot on my machine, and this makes it so that it's easier to get through all those layers, and it feeds through nice and evenly. And then I switched to a longer stitch length. I'm going to use a 3mm length. And again, I'm just showing you here, the pins are not going to get in the way because of where I place them. And then I'm just guiding the fabric through, making sure the needle is staying along that line that I scored. And then once we get to the next stitch, I'll show you that I'll add my quilting guide that comes with the walking foot, and then that'll be able to just glide along the next line to keep everything nice and straight. Now I am just starting right at the edge of all those layers. I'm not going to start at the edge of my top quilt because I just want to make sure I get everything stitched together. And here's some sewing in real time, but I will speed it up. So I'm just guiding everything to keep it nice and straight and sew along that line that I created. And I'm not backstitching at all at the start or end. Now here's that first stitch line, and that's looking good. Now you could decide to go to either the right or the left. I'm going to go over to the right side. to start my next stitch, and I'm just alternating which side of the quilt I start on so that everything stays nice and straight and nothing gets skewed. So before I start this next stitch though, I'll add that quilting guide and make sure I measure to get that 2-inch spacing. And you'll see that the quilting guide is not gonna end up in the line until I get closer, so I still have to make sure I'm guiding that line along the needle to make sure everything stays straight. So I'll just guide it, and then as it gets closer, you'll see that I can then shift my focus to the guide and make sure that's staying in the next line and making sure everything stays straight. So here are 2 of the quilted lines. I'm not going to make you watch me quilt this whole thing, but I do want to give you a close-up of the quilting guide just to see how that kind of glides along that stitched line or your, marked line, so you can focus on that and make sure the spacing is staying equal and it's also staying straight. Alright, so here is all the quilting going in one direction, and now I'm going to do the opposite way. But before I do that, I can go ahead and remove all the quilting pins because it's all sewn together now. It's really not going to shift. So after I have all the pins out, I'm just going to take my ruler again and flip it to the other edge using that 45-degree line again and marking going in the opposite direction. And again, I'll do the 2-inch spacing so it's exactly the same. So here is the quilting all done, and now I'm just going to trim around all the edges to make it nice and straight and even. And here's the back, so it will be reversible, which I love. Now, I have only done binding maybe 2 or 3 times, so I am not the expert on this, but I am using store-bought double fold bias tape. And this one is from Hobby Lobby. So double fold just means it's folded twice. So like that, folded on the edges toward the center and then folded once again. And this one is a 1/2 inch wide when it's completely folded. So then when you unfold it, one edge, that outer edge is just a little bit shorter. So this is about 3/8 of an inch on that fold line. So what I'll do is the right side, which is that outside layer. So when it's folded, we unfold it and unfold it a second time. And the side that's on the back, or the right side, is what we're going to place down onto the edge of the quilt, or the table runner in this case. And then I'm going to stitch right along that fold line because that is 3/8 inches. Then we'll end up folding it once and once more onto the back, and then stitching again along that inner folded edge to finish it off. So I'm going to pin this all in place, and then I'll show you how to stop at the corner and pivot to create a nice 45-degree corner, which is also called a mitered corner. I am going to start on this short end, and I'm going to leave a tail, probably about 3 inches or 3.5 inches, and then start stitching at that point. So I'm pinning it all in, or clipping it in place, and I'm going to make a mark right at this end corner here. And so we're sewing a 3/8 inch seam, which means that I'm going to stop from the edge at 3/8 of an inch. So I'm just measuring here and making a mark with the chalk so I know when to stop to pivot. And this will make more sense in just a minute. But I'm marking at my stopping point where I'm going to pivot and sew off that corner, and then we'll restart the sewing. So again, at this point I've switched back to my regular sewing foot. Here's that tail at the start, and I'm going to start sewing where that first clip is and leave that tail. And this time we are going to backstitch at the beginning and end. And I'm using a 2.4 millimeter stitch length for this step. So just straight stitch, guiding along that fold, and here's that point that's 3/8 inches from the corner, and I'm backstitching, and then I'll put my needle down into the fabric and pivot to the corner. So we want that corner to line up with the needle, and then sew right off the edge of that corner. And then we can remove it from the machine, and we're going to fold this to create that corner. So we want the binding open up completely, and then we'll fold at a 45-degree angle, or a 90-degree angle, creating a 45-degree line here to the corner. And then we will take that binding and fold it down once more, just straight down along that next edge, and make sure that the fold is lined up with the top edge. Just like this. And then we'll place a pin. And then we'll continue sewing starting from this edge here, backstitching, and continuing down to the next corner. So again, I'm going to clip it all in place, and I'll show you that step once again once we get to that next corner so you can see how this works. Okay, so here we're getting close to that pivot point again. I'm backstitching, and I'm going to keep my needle down right at that mark that I made and turn so that the corner is lined up with the needle, and stitch right off to the edge. And so you can see there, the stitching that goes off the corner creates a 45-degree line. So again, we'll open this all the way up, fold it to that right side, creating that 45-degree line, and then fold it back down, making sure that fold lines up with the edge. And then we'll just repeat this step until we have all 4 corners mitered. So I'm at the last pivot point, and we've come back to the beginning. So I still have this tail here from the start, and there are lots of different ways to finish binding, but here is how I'm going to do it. Not saying it's the right way or the best way, but this is the easiest way I have found. So I am going to cut the long tail just about 2.5 inches or so into that beginning tail. And then I'll take that beginning tail and fold it over at an angle. And you can press this if you need to. Then I'll take that ending piece, place it right on top, making sure that fold at the edge is there, and we can clip whatever we need to make sure everything is lining up. Making sure that fold stays in place and all the folded lines of the binding are lining up as well. And then what we'll do is we'll fold it, lining up those folds once again, and we'll have a nice finished edge once we sew this completely. And again, start at that corner, backstitch, and come and stop at the beginning. Now I am going to switch to a brown thread. This is all stitched together now, and we're going to finish off the binding. So you can see my folds, and that brown is going to blend in nicely. and then just making sure everything lines up once again, and fold it over to the back side now. Again, this is double fold bias tape, so you see here I am folding it once and then folding again, and that second folded edge will be on the back side, and I'll clip everything in place all the way around and then sew. And then here is that nice mitered corner. You see it's a nice 45-degree angle on the front, and I'll show you how to fold it on the back side to get the same effect. So we're just gonna pull this straight up, make sure, like, stick your nail in there to get it nice and straight, and then fold it down, and you'll create that nice corner again. And just make sure we're clipping everything in place. So I'm gonna do this, fold it all the way around, clip it all down, and then do a top stitch to finish it off. So here we are, all clipped in place. The bias is folded nicely, and I am starting again at that point where we started, where the bias tape is folded over, and I'm going to do a 3mm stitch length that is about 1/8 of an inch away from the inside folded edge, and you'll see that at the end that'll be more clear. So I am going to backstitch at the start and end again, and the same thing, we'll get to the corners at those pivot points. Make sure to keep the needle down in the fabric and turn at the corner. So stitching at that 1/8 inch away from the folded edge makes this seam about 3/8 inches. So I'm roughly following the 3/8 mark on my machine, and also stopping to double check that I'm catching the back side of the bias binding. So this is quite a tedious process, but it's not hard. If you can sew this quilted table runner, you can make a large quilt. So I encourage you to step out of your comfort zone if you've been waiting to start a sewing project because you're nervous about it or just unsure. I just encourage you to start, just do it. So here is the final quilted table runner. We did simple strip piecing with the standard 1/4 inch seam. We did quilting, diagonal quilting lines, and we did a bias binding. So that's a lot of skills in one project, but it's not hard. So I'm going to press this and set it up on my table so you can get the full view of the finished product.